Airlines will have to meet new disability standards under a federal government plan to shake up the aviation sector. It's also proposing a charter of rights for travellers to give people better ways to pursue refunds and compensation for cancelled or unreasonably delayed flights. Political reporter Isabel Rowe has more from Canberra. So Isabel, there's been ongoing frustration for consumers over delays and cancellations. What's the government going to do to fix this?
Well, Ros, this is, as you say, an aviation charter of rights, which is meant to make the process of getting a refund and knowing what your rights are with airlines and airports a much more streamlined process. The government says that it's going to set up these minimum standards so customers know what they can expect in terms of when they can get a cash refund, what their rights are if there is a delay, and also across all fares, so not just your cheaper or more expensive fares where you get refunds at the moment. There's also, as you mentioned, new disability standards that will be set up. So we've heard stories in the past, horrible stories of people being left off flights that they're meant to be on because they don't have the right equipment. So boosting the compensation available for people who are in those situations as well. The Transport Minister, Catherine King, has spoken a short time ago. She's outlined some of those protections for consumers.
This provides a better opportunity for continuous improvement. And what we all want to see is, in fact, that customers get what they pay for. You've bought a ticket. If the flight doesn't go, or the flight doesn't go when you expect it to go, you should expect that that's the service that is provided. And so really this is about providing remedies to consumers who have found it very difficult to pursue these issues.
And for the people on the ground, Isabel, a new aircraft noise ombudsperson has been announced.
Yes, this is something that was quite new. One of the issues that Catherine King raised is that people who live near flight paths often find that they don't get a good response when they complain about noise, because the current ombudsman is inside the Air Services Australia office, and so there's a potential conflict of interest there, as it's Air Services Australia that actually run those flight paths. So they're saying that this new ombudsman will be outside that office and operate more independently. They're also talking about giving pilots some flying considerately guidelines. They're non-binding, but they're the sorts of things that pilots could consider when they're flying around residential areas.
And Transport Minister Catherine King, Isabel, was also pressed on the issue of competition in the Australian aviation sector.
She was. She's saying that the government will crack down on competition and try and make it better for consumers and therefore bring down prices. It's not something that this white paper goes into quite as heavily as consumer protections, though. There are already a review that's been announced into slot hoarding, particularly at Sydney Airport. So slot hoarding is something where an airline basically books a bunch of takeoff and landing slots at an airport, even if it doesn't have the intention to use them, so that it can prevent a smaller airline from using them. Now, that is something that is alleged to happen at Sydney Airport in particular, and that review is already underway. Catherine King was also asked about her previous decision to block Qatar Airways from expanding into Australia. She didn't answer that particularly clearly. She just said she was considering requests from that airline and many others. She was also asked about breaking up that duopoly of Qantas and Virgin. Here's what she had to say.
Aviation is a very expensive and difficult business to run. It involves the leasing of planes. It involves that interaction between the costs at airports, and airports in and of themselves are a monopoly because you can't fly anywhere else. And so really what we're trying to do is get as much competition as we possibly can, bearing in mind we are a small market.
The Transport Minister also gave an update on Rex. Isabel, what's the latest?
Yes, she said that the government is still working with administrators. As we know, Rex Airlines was put into voluntary administration in late July. About 600 jobs were lost, and we know that there is about $500 million of debt that administrators are currently sorting through. The government has already confirmed that regional flights will stay. It's the capital city flights that have all been cancelled, and it is still considering its package, if anything, to give that airline. But specifically today, Catherine King talked about suspending the use it or lose it slot manager scheme. So at the moment, you're meant to use those slots that you book and to prevent that hoarding situation we talked about earlier. But she's actually said that Rex can keep its slots to make sure that it is still viable. Here is a bit of what she had to say earlier.
This will protect Rex's New South Wales regional slots at Sydney Airport until late March 2026. As the administration process continues, the government, of course, remains absolutely committed to supporting our regional communities to ensure that they stay connected to our major capital city destinations.
That's Catherine King, the Transport Minister there. It's important to note, I think, though, that a lot of these reforms may not actually come into place before the election. For example, the interim person to look over those consumer complaints, the ombudsman, that may not happen until next year. They won't be able to take complaints until then, and as we know, the election needs to be before May, so it could be one for the election box.